The Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Presbyterians divesting on Israel, what it means, the Bring Back Our Boys effort here in the States, fiddling for funds, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. The first major American Christian denomination to decide to divest from companies doing business with Israel made that decision Friday. The Presbyterian Church U.S.A., a 1.7 million member strong Christian denomination, voted to authorize the divestment of church funds from the firms Caterpillar, Hewlett-Packard, and Motorola. The vote got just a slight majority in a vote of 310 for the divestment to 303 against it. It is just the latest in a series of votes in recent years at the Presbyterian Church U.S.A.'s annual General Assembly, all of which had been defeated, many by slim majorities as well. The companies were specifically cited by the church for their, quote, non-peaceful pursuits in the region. These non-peaceful pursuits aren't detailed by PCUSA in their communications about the divestment, but others pursuing divestment from these companies have cited as examples Hewlett-Packard's eye and face scanning devices used at Israeli checkpoints, Motorola's communications technology employed within the West Bank, and Caterpillar's bulldozers being used to raze Palestinian homes. As with so many individual actions regarding Israel, this will not have a large impact on its own. PCUSA's membership is less than 3% of the evangelical population in America, and to give an example from one of the companies from which it's divesting, Caterpillar, the top 10 shareholders in Caterpillar own more than a third of the company's stock. PCUSA doesn't hold close to even 1% of the $68 billion company. And certainly most of these companies would feel they would face a larger public relations backlash if they stopped supplying Israel with equipment now than they would from slightly more than half of the PCUSA membership protesting their activities. But the fact that this one story has relatively little impact doesn't mean it's not important. This is one more step in the onward march of American public opinion toward being critical of Israel's occupation of the West Bank and blockade of Gaza, considering boycotts, divestment, and sanctions as worthwhile tactics and hoping to get Israel to change its approach, and including language that suggests Israel is guilty of installing apartheid. That PCUSA has come to use divestment today after years of voting it down shows how the movement to use such tactics is growing. But the story about Israel that has so many around the globe captivated this week is the abduction of 3 Israeli teenagers in the West Bank. Meredith Gansman reports on activities here in the United States by those who hope for their return.
Bring our boys home! Bring our boys home!
These were the chants heard last Wednesday in Lower Manhattan when local community and religious leaders gathered in solidarity with the families of 3 Israeli teenagers, 16-year-old Gilad Sha'ar, 16-year-old Naftali Frankel, and 19-year-old Ayal Yifrach, who were kidnapped in Israel's West Bank near the Palestinian city of Hebron on Thursday, June 12th, while going home from school. One of the teenagers, Naftali Frankel, is a dual Israeli-American citizen. He has local family like his cousin, Manny Halberstam.
He has such great moral character. He's a very good brother to all of his younger siblings, and he's such a great son to his parents. And with a child of such moral character, life is so rich with potential.
But it's not just a local plea. Similar gatherings have been held across the country and the world, from Boca Raton to Chicago and Australia to Johannesburg. Nowhere, though, is the cry louder than from the boy's family. Naftali's mother, Racheli Frankel, told Israel's Channel 2 News,
God willing, we'll all be able to celebrate their return safely.
Secretary of State John Kerry has called the kidnappings a despicable terrorist act, an act New Yorkers are all too familiar with.
There could be no more appropriate place than the shadow of the World Trade Center for us to gather here to be reminded of the price of terrorism that we all pay.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu blames the kidnappings on the government formed between the Palestinian government and Hamas.
Israel warned the international community about the dangers of endorsing the Fatah-Hamas Unity Pact.
And the campaign to return these kidnapped teenagers is being connected on social media with the campaign regarding the recent abduction of Nigerian schoolgirls by the Boko Haram group. Just as social media has been used in the Nigerian kidnappings, the public is again taking to social media to raise awareness. The hashtag is bringbackourboys, but the community leaders here want you to know this is much more than a slogan for the kidnapped Israeli teenagers. New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer is calling for action.
Everything that can be done must be done to bring them back safely.
Israeli Consul General Ido Aharoni explained how the Israeli government is attempting to locate the teenagers.
Right now, we concentrate most of the energy and the effort in the greater Hebron area, which is south of Jerusalem. But we don't exclude the possibility of doing the same in other parts of the West Bank.
For more information on these 3 Israeli teenagers and the Bring Back Our Boys campaign, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Moving on, fiddling in the Old World was a major part of the Jewish tradition. Christian Needon reports on a leading violinist's effort to use his music to raise funds.
Russian Heritage Month in New York City featured a unique musical performance by one of Russian-American Jewry's finest musicians, playing in one of the city's best new acoustic venues. Violinist Philip Quint hosted a concert recently at the New York Times Building's Times Center to benefit the Russian-American Foundation. The concert featured other renowned musicians that Quint recruited and played with, including fellow Jewish violinist Joshua Bell. Quint sat down with the Jewish Channel to discuss putting together the concert's program, which began with the rare chance to play live on stage with Bell.
We've been friends for many years, but we've never publicly performed. So the show really started from Joshua agreeing to support this cause and this benefit and charity. And from that point on, I went through all of the friends that I love and people that I've collaborated with in the last 10-15 years.
The Russian-American Foundation they were benefiting is an organization close to Quint's heart.
Bringing kids from Israel, bringing kids from Russia that want to study Jewish history, that want to have the opportunity to study in New York with the best. This is what this Russian-American Foundation does.
So when Philip shared with his friends the fact that this is the organization he does a lot of projects together and would be very much interested to go ahead in supporting of, I think everyone decided to support him.
Russian-American Foundation President Marina Kovalyev said her organization's annual Russian Heritage Month programming is important for highlighting the religious freedoms that Russian Jews enjoy in America.
Russians are very serious about our Jewish identity. For most of us, it was something that we couldn't practice back to Russia. Our parents couldn't practice back to Russia, and only greatest memories of our grandparents and great-grandparents gave us that an amazing craving for Jewish culture.
Quint was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, and acknowledged the great Russian Jewish violinists who have elevated the art of his instrument.
The Russian Jewish school really dominated beginning of the last century with Yasha Heifetz, Nathan Milstein, Isaac Stern, David Oistrakh, Leonid Kogan. So honestly, coming from that tradition, it's a lot of pressure. At the same time, it is an honor.
To see more from Philip Quint about his concert to benefit the Russian-American Foundation, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Finally, this week on Up Close, how people treat each other. Kim Goldman's brother was murdered in one of the most notorious crimes of the 20th century. She discusses her experience and her attitudes toward the man found responsible for her brother's killing, O.J. Simpson, in her new book, Can't Forgive. Meantime, within the Jewish tradition, one Orthodox Jewish rabbi and Bar-Ilan University professor believes his community has lost the emphasis it needs to have on the proper way to treat other people. focusing too much on ritual, prayer, and other acts of submission to God. Rabbi Daniel Sperber is the author of On the Relationship of Mitzvot Between Man and His Neighbor and Man and His Maker. And then, to speak about one of the great examples of a man digging deeply into moral degeneracy and the Stoic philosopher who perhaps enabled him, I interviewed James Romm, author of Dying Every Day, Seneca at the Court of Nero. Here are some of the highlights from my interview with Daniel Sperber. Talk about the idea that even within the rabbinic literature, when you put two commandments side by side, that consistently the commandment to do something for one's fellow takes precedence over doing something with an intention of serving God.
Yes, and I think the classic example is the story that appears earlier on Breshit in Parshat Vayera, where...
That's in the beginning of Genesis. Yeah.
Yes, in the beginning of Genesis, when Avraham Avinu is just had his circumcision, and it's on the third day, and it's very painful. He's sitting at the opening of his tent. According to the Bible, God comes to visit him, and he's visiting the sick, which is another of these mitzvot, interpersonal mitzvot. And then these three Bedouin angels, but they look like Bedouin, just turn up, and they're all dusty. They're coming out of the desert. And Abraham says to Kadosh Baruch Hu, he says, wait a minute, you can wait, I'll deal with these visitors. And the rabbi said that it's a greater mitzvah to host a stranger than even having a relationship to God. Now, one would think that having a relationship with God should be the sort of the zenith, the ultimate aim of every religious Jew, having some sort of a relationship. In Chassidut, they would call it dveikut, cleaving to God. But here he says to God, wait, I have to deal with these visitors.
Right. Well, that's one of the funny things about Jewish law and ritual, that you find great specification on exactly how ritual should be conducted. But is there even written down anywhere the specifics of like what defines a shove, what defines a push?
One of the things that we're not very careful about, for example, is we're very particular on ritual things in the synagogue and so on and so forth, but we don't mind offending people. Somebody that comes into the synagogue and hasn't got a seat to sit, and he sits on somebody's seat, and the guy says, no, that's my seat, and he pushes it away, and he doesn't realize that actually what he's doing is a very serious avera, it's a very serious crime.
You actually quote one of the great sages of the 20th century on precisely this point, that he was asked what he thought about the growth in pride in the gay community, and he said, and he put it in relative terms that I think a lot of modern Orthodox people might understand.
Yeah, we can't deny the fact that contemporary society presents new challenges, and we have to recognize the fact, and we have to reevaluate many of our so-called traditionally accepted views. And that's always a very difficult and also a dangerous process.
You can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable. You can also listen to the full audio of Up Close as a podcast available on iTunes or in your favorite podcast player. That's all for this week from all of us here at the Jewish Channel. Be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.